We'll head to the first question, which is down the front here.
Jonathan Locke is my name.
Jonathan, can you use the mic, please?
Thank you. Jonathan Locke is my name. I'm from Gleniffer, just a little bit that way. Kerry, you mentioned a phone network. You're speaking of mobile phone?
We're interested in mobiles, but we're more interested in landlines.
Okay. I just noticed on the board that went round, no phone numbers were asked for.
On the contact, the attendance
right, on the contact list.
That's because it's just an attendance list for who was here today. Yeah. And if you want to register to be part of the Neighbourhood Care Network, which we really urge you to do, you'll see a long registration form in the material on your seats.
Right.
And if you can please fill that in, or if you want to use a QR code to do it online, you can. It's asking you a bunch of questions about your contact details, if there are vulnerable people in your household, if you're happy for us to store your data, so you're giving us your consent to keep that info. And that's how you would register.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for asking that. I should have made that clearer up front. So we're up for some discussion from the floor. I do have a few Dorothy Dixer questions, but I'm sure there are questions in the audience.
Can I just respond a bit more to the communication thing? It's actually any communication. You know, we are aware that places like Darkwood, you know, the mobile phone tag goes down first, and then 24 hours later, if that, the landlines go down. So some people set up UHF networks using two-way radios, sat phones. Now, not everybody can afford a sat phone, but if there's, the best example of Darkwood, there are about 4 main islands that form when the river comes up. And if one person on each of those islands has a sat phone, then the other people in that area have access to get emergency calls out if all the other communication levels are down. So the communication plan is, even above landlines and mobile phones.
So can I just have a sense about whether there's any questions in the room or comments? There's one, two, that's a good start, so 3. So Jane, for the panel.
Yep. My question is about the bridges, McFadden's, and also on Roses Road, the little unnamed creek one. I'm wondering, at what height do those sections of the road get cut off by floodwater? Like, at what actual height can Gleniffer residents not get to town anymore?
It was just an observation that you don't have to have much rain for the Little Roses Creek to go under. I'd probably say 2 days of heavy rain, because there's a lot of runoff goes into that little creek and it comes up very quickly.
Because we watch the river height monitor for Thora and Gleniffer and town. So I'm wondering, is there some sort of average height where I can see, when Thora's at this, when Never's at that, McFadden's is down? Yeah. Is there? I know you don't have. You're saying you don't have the data, but is there any sort of reference point?
I don't know, and I probably should know. But I haven't sat down and really watched an event. What happens during an event, I get so busy with all the pools of my time, and then at the end of it, I'm going, oh, thank God that event's over. I don't want to think about the SES for another 6 months or whatever it is. That little planning step gets missed out because we're volunteers. But I would love to have that knowledge, so if somebody is able to watch something like that and feed that back to us, that would be great.
I think I do a lot of the mapping and inundation stuff. So I think there are two main parts to the answer to that question. One is if you lower down the catchment, so down onto the floodplains and down towards the junction, then we can look at the average, flood height, and we can look at road elevation and say, you know, the dip at this creek is at 8 metres, you know, like Lavender Bridge goes under. And we can say the road will go under at this height when the Bellingen River is coming up. The other part of the answer, and I'll expand on that bit in a minute, but the other answer to the question is the graphs in Strider's presentation about the rainfall. Every rainfall and flood event is different. So, you know, one event you'll get, you know, a lot of rain up against the escarpment in, you know, even just in the corner up here and not up at the Crystal Creek end. And that will drive which, you know, when the roads go under. And because of the steepness of this higher end of the valley, they'll come up and go down very quickly. I can give you the elevation of the road, but that's not going to give you any ability to say, oh, you know, the Lavender's River gauge is up this high. We're not going to be get in there, or it's going to affect us up here, because, as Strider said, there's just the lack of data to work on up in this. So it's very much local knowledge, you know, ringing the longer term neighbours or somebody closer to the pinch points and the creeks and the causeways that are lower. And that's probably the best answer, because when the rivers are up and there's rainfall events, it's only the locals that can see what's happening on a particular creek.
Thanks, Ian. And it is a pitch for the Weather Watch pilot I talked about before, because this is exactly what it's trying to help with. So one there and then one behind.
Phil Gilmore from Roses Road. A general comment to start with. With the flooding, we haven't had a big flood in the Bellinger in most of the current people living here. 98, I think, was 9.2 at Bellingen Bridge, I think. 74 was, and then 1950. 1950 was 10.5 metres in Bellingen. That's not even a 1 in 100 year flood according to the current calculations. Then you look at a theoretical maximum flood. The theoretical maximum flood in the Bellinger is about 16.5 metres, I think it is, at Bellingen. The Lismore flood, for example, last year now, was 14.5 metres. The theoretical maximum for Lismore is 16.5 as well. So it wasn't even a theoretical maximum flood. So we haven't experienced a big flood in the Bellinger, really, in living memory. And if we do get a flood like Lismore, you know, we're going to be in big trouble. That's just a general comment. A specific question is the Gleniffer gauge that's on the bomb site. Whereabouts is that, the rainfall gauge?
So do you know the little turning right here on the Promised Land Loop Road, about 300-400 metres along, it turns to the left, and just there, the right-hand side, there's a little dirt track that goes down to this Broken Bridge swimming spot. Just maybe 20 metres beyond that turn-off, the creek is quite close to the road there. There's a gauge point there on the creek.
That's rainfall gauge?
No, that's the water level.
No, the rainfall gauge.
Oh, the rainfall gauge, I believe, is Keogh's Farm. That's what they say. No, sorry, Crystal Creek. Keogh's Farm is the water level gauge.
Well, Crystal Creek is the top of the valley.
But top of the valley.
There's also a Gleniffer gauge is on the bomb site. So where's that? Okay,
So we've only ever relied on one water level gauge, which is the Broken Bridge one, is my understanding. Is that right? So it's on the bridge just here. So the Broken Bridge one is that out of date now? Yeah, okay, all right. So possibly the Broken Bridge is what I always thought of it, but it was getting out of action too much flood damage, and so they've put it here at the bridge. Yeah.
It's just really interesting, the variation in rainfall figures.
Yep.
between, you know, I read the rain regularly at my place, and it can often be very different from the Gleniffer figure.
Yeah, and we've identified that. Rosie, I was just going to answer, thinking what Ian said before, is every event is so different, but if you're seeing 3 metres at Thora, I think generally here would still be okay unless you're getting some flash flooding rainfall that you're seeing. Because what that'll do is you're getting some flooding coming down the Bellinger River that will hold up some of the Never Never as well. Once you start getting above 3 metres at Thora, I think it takes less for it to go out. But here it's such flash flooding up and down, it's a really hard one to gauge how long. I think the main thing is this would go down quickly unless it's quite high at Bellinger River holding it up, then it might slow the tail down how low it goes. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of like that Gleniffer Road just outside of town, of what height of deluge it has to be for that to be inundated?
To my mind, that's a moderate to major for that to go under. Yeah, yeah.
I have lived here since 1991 in the area, and I've never felt threatened by flood. Really, unless you do something really stupid, all you have to do is avoid it, stay at home. I don't know about other people's houses. It seems like Bellingen learnt very early on in its settlement to build its houses in safe places. So I'd like to concentrate on fire because that is something that doesn't necessarily rely on us doing something stupid for it to sneak up and really threaten us. What I found really interesting about the 2019 fires was that all of the trigger points for evacuation that I had in my fire management plan were pressed on a daily basis. You know, things like smoke in the valley, like a fire within 13 kilometres, all of that stuff was just happening all the time. So it felt like the whole rules about fire and fire behaviour were completely rewritten in that fire. And one of the things that I really experienced is then that I could not rely on historical data about how to behave. And the whole question about communication really became such an issue because we've got 3 or 4 ways out of Gleniffer, and it really becomes an issue which road is safe currently to leave, given that they're all forested basically, except for Somerville's Road, which is less forested. But it just feels like that sort of information. I realise that the RFS isn't necessarily prepared to legally state what is the right way to leave, or even has the resources to actually observe what is the right road to leave on. But that's the sort of information we need as a community here in Bellingen.
Yeah, I understand all that, and it's rather difficult to give anyone a precise answer on that. We look at the bushfire survival plan, and one of the options is leave. What they say on that one is leave early. So I probably would say that you need to leave, if you think you're going to leave and the warnings are such that you are, then you need to leave before it ever gets to a point where you don't know which road to take because of fires and that. Because I don't know, they can move so quickly and those 2019 fires and that, everything was so dry. We had rainforest pockets in the national park and state forests burning, which have never burnt before. We had occasions there, well, in my own backyard, I picked up a whole heap of burnt leaves. So they were coming from the Bee's Nest fire, which was probably 10 plus kilometres away. So the major problem we have in those large fires is the embers travelling long distances and starting fires ahead of the major fire front. And that really gets to something that's totally unpredictable because you don't know. So, yeah, again, we go back to the RFS recommendations, and I suppose if you are going to leave, get out early and don't wait till it's too late. The other interesting thing in that CRC report that I referenced there are a number of people in there that didn't leave at the right time, and people, I think it was 6% or something like that, decided to leave as the fire arrived. Those situations doing that can lead to catastrophe. Basically, people can end up dying because they're trying to leave. So that's all I can say with that, and I can't give you an answer. I can't give you an option. Like floods, every fire is going to be different. It's going to come from a different direction. The wind, temperature, fuel conditions are all going to be different. So don't give an answer.
The weather on that day, when Bee's Nest started, we were getting hot embers. They were going to the coast. That fire was forming its own weather pattern, and that's what drove all those embers out this way. It wasn't necessarily that windy here while it was happening. It was hot and smoky, but if you had that wind and spot fires popping up, well, that's a bad situation to be in. It's gauging the weather at the time. Like Dennis said, there's no real way of predicting it.
We're getting close to the point where we need to have a wrap-up discussion and next steps. So I'd just like to ask, is there anyone who's got a really burning question?
Burning.
Now I'm drowning in it. My father would roll his eyes if he saw me now. So people will be around for afternoon tea. If you have any questions you want to ask about your own properties or want to keep the conversation going, we can do that over afternoon tea. I am going to hand over to Tony in a tick, but I would like to introduce you to Sunny Neal, who I put on the spot, who's working in the resilience team at council. And I just want to say, until a few years ago, I'd never really had any exposure to disaster management and emergency management and the sort of things that we're talking about today, and I've been learning as I'm going. But I was lucky enough to go to Sydney to help accept an award that Bellingen Council and the community groups that were involved in the pandemic response group were given sometime last year. And I got to talk to a number of other community people about what they were doing in their areas. And I've been able to have those conversations more and more in this role. And I really hadn't understood how far ahead, and I know this sometimes doesn't get said about council, but I am saying it today, how far ahead Bellingen Shire Council is and has been for some time now in trying to create mechanisms to work in partnership with the community and share local knowledge. And the establishment of the Community Resilience Network, which Sunny's about to talk about, is a really good example of that, and it's something that I think as a community we really need to get behind, because it's going to help make a big difference when we are in severe situations and disasters have been called, as well as being able to work together in the meantime. So this is a bit of a shout out to thank Council for the time and investment it's put into this space, and really looking forward to telling people about it.
Hello. Hello. So I knew that I was talking, but I'm not part of the panel. So very quickly, I'm new to the Shire. We came here 6 months ago with our 4 children. We live down in North Bellow. And I've been in recovery and disaster management for about 20 years. And, you know, it's always shocking when you hear that you're doing better than a lot of other people because you see the gaps. But in this shire, we are really doing, not just the council, but the community as well. And, you know, the volunteer groups, we are so well organised and prepared compared to so many other communities. And there's a long way to go. And the disasters we're facing are, you know, metastasising and changing rapidly. But we're doing a really good job. One of the things about disasters is that there are many moving parts. So the Community Resilience Network is council and the state government's attempt to try to manage how those moving parts talk to each other. So when an event happens, preparing for it and responding to it and then recovering from it, which is really important, there are kind of three main bits. You've got the community who is dealing with the event. You've got the emergency services who are dealing with themselves and dealing with the event. And then you've got the council and the government who are trying to support the other two parts. And those three kind of wheels need to work together smoothly and perfectly. And they never quite do. The reason we have the Community Resilience Network is to try to do the thinking to make those three parts, the council, the community and the emergency services, work as smoothly as we possibly can when the event happens and when we're recovering from it. So the Resilience Network meets every 3 months. It's involved in everything the council does, a lot of what the emergency services do, and how we draw those links between those different agencies is really what we're all about. So someone said to me a little while ago, you know, what does the Resilience Network do? It doesn't have the answer, but it certainly asks all the right questions. This is the place to ask those questions. But there are a few things that it is doing. And one of them is the recovery plan for the entire Shire. And I want to mention just this one thing. I mean, there are so many things that the Resilience Network is doing, but one of the things it's doing is a recovery plan for the entire Shire. One part of that will be, you know, what is every community that we've got in the Shire? What are the demographics? What are the circumstances? What is the economics, etc., etc.? That's our side of it. And then fundamentally, what is it that is important to that community that if a fire came through or a flood came through and you needed to recover afterwards, what would you want to recover to? So what is it about this community that's important to you that if a fire came through and did a lot of damage and you needed to come back afterwards, what would you want to preserve and protect that was the most important thing for your community that's different from maybe anyone else? And it can be, you know, there are some communities where it is not having to talk to my neighbours much. That's what we want. We live here because we want isolation. For some communities, we live here because it's the natural environment. For some communities, we live here because of the services. Whatever it is for you that's important, that has to be captured in some way so that when recovery happens, we can go as a council and as an emergency services, this is what we want to get back to. This is what's important to us. So I mention that because that's something that we're going to be doing over the next 6 to 12 months in communities all over the Shire, and we'll be doing things in this area as well. The Resilience Network meets every 3 months. We meet for a couple of hours. There are lots of things in between those meetings. It's by expression of interest only. So if you are interested in being involved, tap me on the shoulder afterwards, give me your email address, and I'll send you out an expression of interest form, and you can request to be part of it. So that's the Resilience Network. Do I have another 2 minutes? Or?
We bring Tony in.
Yep.
2 minutes for next steps? Yep, great. So at that point, thank you. Yep. We're going to come back to the other two things in a tick. I'd like to bring Tony back, who's going to help us figure out next steps for...
Well, that's an easy one. Look, I think next steps are for people to register if you want to become involved with the Neighbourhood Care Network. I also think just have a bit of a think about how your own local area works. And I know we've got lots of long-term residents here who have good local networks. They know who's where. How could that fit into something like this, if you want it to? I'd like to hear more from Sonny because he's got something that piqued my interest that I heard about, that the Briarfield
community are doing, you know, as part of their building resilience. I think speaking to myself or to Jane, if you are interested in being a local coordinator, if you think actually my area doesn't have much of a network or I could help do something there, yes, please come up and speak to us.
And so we will,
All right, so I'm going to just give you a quick list. So you guys have all come together to learn about how to prepare for and manage these kinds of events. There are other communities around the Shire that are doing some really interesting things, so I'll just throw them at you. I'm available in the council now for at least another 18 months, and I'm essentially your resource. So I'm your road to, or your truck to drive around. If there are things that you want to do following from this, then you can communicate with me, or talk to Kerry, or talk to Tony, and I'm a living resource, and I've even got a little bit of budget to help manage events and, you know, do things that would be of interest to you. So I'm available for the next step if there is one. So here's a list of what some other communities are doing, using me or just doing them for themselves. So Briarfield is having a festival, and then they're running a series of seminars on emergency management issues that are of interest to them. Kalang is having video nights. Megan is doing something awesome called Megan Gathers, which is they're getting a big map made of the area, and they're getting elders from around the Shire, around their area, who don't normally come out much, some of whom have been isolated for a long time, to come back and have conversations about what actually happened in the area in the last 70 years. Not just for newbies, but for people who've been there for a long time, and it's good for those elders too. And then there's the recovery plan. We also have a piece of technology, which is a bit of fun, called a sim table, which is a big table with sand that you can project Gleniffer or the area onto and simulate what would happen if a fire came down and see where it would go, what it would do, change the wind gauge, change the temperature, change the moisture, and see what would happen, where it would burn, where it wouldn't burn, what would have happened if the wind didn't change. You know, was it you talking about that? Dennis? Yeah, what would have happened if the wind hadn't turned? Where might it have gone? So these are all a bunch of options. That's just the starting point. Anything that you think would be important to use this opportunity to leverage into something else, talk to Tony, talk to Kerry, or talk directly to me, and we'll do our best to, you know, make it happen.
Thank you, Sunny. Can I point out one thing? Look, just before we finish, I did mention that Barry was here, and I would encourage people to go and have a little bit of a look back in history, and I know Barry's very happy to speak to people about it if they would like to afterwards. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Tony. And in all of the communities we've been working with, there's people who've lived in those communities for a long time, and a few people are here today who have huge local knowledge, and some mechanism to help share that in an ongoing way is really a great thing to develop. That's happening up in Darkwood, and it's happening in some of the other communities. It's great people are here today, but I know just from conversations I've had with a few people too, how much local knowledge there is that would be great to find ways to share. So we're coming to the end of the, thank you. Gabby's just reminded me that we're also going to invite Helen, who's been doing some work in Roses Road, to say a couple of words as a local person just before we wrap up.
Oh, okay. I'm here a bit on like a default sort of thing. I didn't really intend to be a coordinator or a network person, but what happened to me was prior to the 2019 fires, I was sitting at home one day and it was a really, really hot, dry, windy day. And I got frightened. And I suddenly thought, how do the other people in my road, on Roses Road, know what's going on? I didn't know what was going on. We're probably one of two houses that don't see the mountains. We look the other way, out to that way. And I'd always thought, oh, if I see a whiff of smoke out there, I'm out of here. But I don't know what's coming out from Dorrigo. So I started asking my friends, Do you have a bushfire plan? Most said no. What are you going to do if there's a fire? We'll just go down to the river and jump in the river. And I thought, well, I don't like the idea of that. It didn't seem to me like a very practical thing to be doing. So then I thought I'll put out a survey and ask people what they're going to do. So I'll just quickly tell you some of the things that are on the survey, which are covered by the neighbourhood network I now discover. And I've been part of this neighbourhood network getting all COVID updates, but I didn't know that you were doing this sort of thing. So, it is better. Sorry, thank you, Sonny. The first question was like, do you have a bushfire plan? And if no, would you like help to prepare one? Is your current plan more detailed than just where do I go and what do I take? Do you intend to stay or go in the event of a bushfire, and where? Are you aware of the dangers of leaving too late, smoke causing car accidents, stalling of cars, unexpected fire further down the road? Where do you intend to shelter? Is your home suitable or available to protect other residents if they are unable to stay in their own home or get to an evacuation centre at the Gleniffer Hall or in town? Are there elderly or children in your household? Do you have a plan for them? Do you have pets or animals that will need to be evacuated, and do you have a plan for them? Do you have easy access through your property to the river in the event that both ends of Roses Road are blocked? Do you have a reasonably safe, cleared paddock for people to take shelter if necessary? And I don't know that that's very safe. Do you have access to another road via a neighbour's property? And some people from Roses Road can access Somerville's Road. And which neighbour and which road? Do you have access to heavy machinery or a chainsaw for pre or post clearing? And if so, what? Then I wanted name, address, phone number. Who will you notify on the road that there is an emergency and may not be home? And maybe we could set up a phone network of buddies who will remember to check on each other. These buddies should also be aware of each other's bushfire plans and communicate what each is doing as the emergency increases. And are you willing to get together to share bushfire plans and learn from each other? So I sent that out. And I'd read a lot. I bought this book, and it's done prior to 2019 bushfires. It's a fantastic little resource. I don't know how hard it is to access, and I don't know if it's been updated since the 2019 bushfires. But the amount of knowledge I got from there, and I talked to Dennis, came along and organised some meetings. You never get enough people, do you, Dennis? You don't get everyone to come. I got a fantastic response the first time to that survey, and I collated all of that and sent it back around to everyone on the road so that everyone knew what everyone else was doing. So we all felt a little bit like we knew things, but there's a lot of changes have happened in Roses Road, and also there's so many people who have always been saying, oh, we're not going to get a bushfire here because there hasn't been a bushfire in the area since 1964 or something like that. And so I just felt like, I had to revise that. So at the moment I'm still waiting to get a lot of survey responses back, so we go again. And now that I understand that the Neighbourhood Care Centre are doing a lot of that, I'll be able to work with them, I hope, to try and collate that into something even better. Yeah, so that's just my involvement, and it's partly because I realised if I'm in trouble, I've got to rely on my neighbours, and it also realised that if I'm trying to do the right thing and my neighbour who's letting their grass grow a metre high and it's on a slope coming towards my place, what am I going to do if they're not looking after their place? So I just thought, we're all in it together on Roses Road, and that's how I started, and I think we're all the better for knowing a bit about each other, but we've got a long way to go.
Thanks, Helen. That's such a great example. What Helen described is exactly what local neighbourhood groups are doing with a little bit of support from us, and it's such a great living example. I'd like to really thank you for the leadership that you took and for sharing that story.
Just a quick one, right? Just a quick one. If anyone hasn't got a bushfire survival plan, we have copies on the table over there, plus other information sheets. So please grab one on the way out. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. So we're at afternoon tea time. I'd like to really thank everybody for coming, all of you for coming. Bear, you didn't get much of a look in, I'm sorry, but it's really great you were here. Thank you for coming. And thank everyone, here for coming, because it's... And Councillor Cook's going to close us out.
If everybody could fill in the feedback form that you all have as well, would be great. Thanks.
Sorry, I realise I overlooked something. The Gleniffer Hall Association, who we're using this with their grace. Thank you very much. But if you do want to be on the contact list for the Gleniffer Hall, there is a sheet up at the back, and I'd forgotten to let anyone know.
Thanks, Tony, and Councillor Cook.
Thank you for organising this really great event, and I encourage everyone to sign up to the Neighbourhood Care Network. We just talked about the Gleniffer Hall, and I guess when this hall was built, everyone that lived in this area would have come here and had social events and dances and everything, and those kind of things have gone by the wayside now. So this is our new modern way of connecting with our neighbours, and whether the disaster be a bushfire or a flood, and I guess everyone here's probably been through a flood or 3 or 6, but it's all the same thing really. It's planning and knowing what your plan is and knowing who to contact and having that preparation there and your networks and your communication, and buy batteries for your radios.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. There's afternoon tea if you want to stick around.